with Congress party taking a complete U-turn from the major national party which opposed the Mandal politics in 1990s to the party which is trying to champion the OBC politics in the run-up to 2024 general election. We have seen multitude of reflections and colors of caste in Indian politics. The traditional role played by the Congress party is today being run by the BJP government. The Prime Minister came up with a compelling statement that he believes only in four castes. That is the farmers, the women, the poor and the youth. In this context, let's try to revisit Bhimrao Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste. That is the whole thesis of today's news case. Let's go ahead. Try to understand some of the historical and other context of Annihilation of Caste. So this is basically a speech drafted by B.R. Ambedkar in 1936. It was supposed to be presented in the annual conference of Jat-Pat Torak Mandal. Now, what happened afterwards is, once the speech is drafted, Ambedkar has sent this speech for the specific committee to print it and redistribute to the members. Now, once some of the Orthodox Hindu members have came across this speech, they find the speech highly offensive, and they wanted certain sections, certain parts of the speech to be removed or amended. Now, when this committee contacted Mr. Ambedkar to amend certain part of his speech, Ambedkar has categorically rejected the request, stating that he will not even amend a single comma of the speech. Now, this led to the threat of Orthodox Hindu factions to the committee or to the conference that was going to be happen, and which eventually led to the cancellation of the conference. This was the whole context how Annihilation of Caste came into being. Basically, it is a speech of Ambedkar. You can buy it. Later, it was published by Ambedkar on its own expenses. You can buy today even this book, a very small book, you can get it. Let's see some of the arguments put forward by Ambedkar in this book. Let's try to understand what does he mean by Annihilation of Caste. Annihilation of Caste, apart from the traditional criticism of caste which we usually see in nationalist leaders, including Gandhi, including not many other leaders, Ambedkar goes one step ahead. He calls for complete eradication of caste hierarchies. He not just calls for reformation of caste like Gandhi. Gandhi was more towards empowerment of all caste, abolition of eradication of untouchability and empowerment of lower caste. That was the objective of Gandhi. Whereas Ambedkar stood for complete eradication of the social religious order that calls for caste hierarchies. And this eradication will not happen if there is no complete rejection of religious sanction for the caste. He calls for burning of Vedas. He calls for burning of Smritis, Shrutis, every religious books or every religious sanctions that is given in support of caste system. Why do we need to annihilate caste? Let's try to understand some of the compelling arguments put forward by Ambedkar. One of the books start with this argument. Why we need social reform over political reform. So again, go back. It was a time of late 1930s, mid-1930s. India has just crossed over from civil disobedience movement. There has been strengthening political work that is happening. There has been high socialist tendencies among Indian politicians of the time. It was during this time this book was written. Now, Ambedkar calls for social reform over political reform. Why social reform is important? Again, you can connect this with the ideas of Gandhi. What does freedom or independence mean? And what does independence of a nation mean? For Ambedkar, if you don't have a social system where individuals can have freedom to do whatever they want to do. Then what does the political freedom, what does the replacing of Britishers with Indian rulers mean to this society? It brings the element of importance of having a certain social perspective, a social ground, a social equality, so that the political freedom or the political empowerment becomes meaningful. Otherwise, whatever the social political freedom or political independence we are talking about, it is just just accounts to nothingness. Similarly, the fallacy of Indian socialists and economic cost of caste. Indian socialists have drawn their motivations from different aspects, even from the Marxist and socialist movements of the time. So Ambedkar categorically rejects that. The fallacies or the limitations or the crisis of caste may not be the only reason that is required to propel a revolution. For example, we see the case, take the example of French Revolution. Why French Revolution become success or impactful? Because the whole society came together for action. Since we have n number of caste within our society, caste discrimination or caste crimes may not be the only motivation that is required for a collective revolution like the French Revolution. And he also cites some huge economic cost associated with caste. The economic cost of caste. If people are not allowed to do whatever job they want to do, he says this imparts greatest inefficiencies to the economic system. People are stopped from doing what they want to do. This is the major cause of unemployment in India. It is not the lack of the jobs or lack of entrepreneurship spirit. It is the impact of social caste that limits people from taking up different jobs, that limits the economic potential of the society. He put forward the economic argument against caste system. Similarly, he also questioned the myth of Hindu society. As per Ambedkar, the Hindu society as single society doesn't exist. It only exists at different castes. The only exception where Hindu society as a single unit came to exist is when there is religious conflict with some other religion. Otherwise, it is just a collection of castes. He also put forward the arguments why Hindu religion is not a missionary religion like Islam or Christianity. Because when caste system is crystallized, caste system is the social order of Hindu religion. There is no scope for conversions. He put forward this as the major reason why Hindu religions remains a non-missionary religion. So these are most of the compelling arguments. We look for when we speak about freedom or independence. Freedom of mind is the real freedom. A person whose mind is not free, though he may not be in chains, is a slave, not a free man. So the idea of freedom you can associate with Gandhi's Gram Swaraj, Gandhi's complete freedom. There is so much of connection. The freedom of individual person is given importance by Ambedkar. And this freedom will not happen if we are still divided on the lines of caste. Our battle is not for wealth nor for power. Our battle is freedom and reclamation of human personality. That means everyone should have the capacity to reflect his personality, whether it is in his work or whether it is in social actions. If you are putting these within the bounds of any social order, whether it is caste, whether it is class, then you are limiting the society, limiting the humanity. He even came with a compelling statement that Hindu as a religion did treason against the country by sticking to the caste ideologies. Going ahead, so these are all what we discussed. How to annihilate caste? That comes the next important question. How to come about this caste? And Ambedkar points out 3 different strategies. What's most important is abolition of subcaste. Subcaste are through which the caste identities are crystallized. So the vision, or you can see the perspective, should be to abolition of this subcaste. This can happen through intercaste dinings as well as intercaste marriages. While he categorically points out that intercaste dining is comparatively a weaker strategy, because we already have intercaste dining in so many different castes, and it has limited reach, it has limited impact in evolving the overall psyche of the society. Whereas intercaste marriages are fundamental tools to eradicate caste from the society. This is being promoted. Then there is kin and kith relations between all the members, different across the caste lines. And this cannot be broken even by ideologies, even by Vedas, even by Shrutis or Smritis. So intercaste marriages has been proposed by Ambedkar as one of the most important strategy going forward to abolish caste. So this whole discussion what we had, this has a historical construct associated with this. You can only understand this if you relate with the caste society and the politics of India in 1930s and 1940s and afterwards. Let's try to understand some of the ethical reflections which we can read from Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste. The most important ethical revelation is whatever the arguments Ambedkar is putting forward, it is based on the universal moral principles of equality and justice. You can see reflections of today we have the idea of human rights. Today we have the idea of fundamental rights. So these principles where individual dignity is being upheld, dignity is being given utmost priority. This you can see throughout the arguments of B.R. Ambedkar. Now, ethical goal is to create a society where individuals are not prejudiced or limited by their caste. Unleashing the human potential, whether it is in the social sector or economic sector, that has been the perspective. Annihilation of caste can be seen as a moral imperative. We have discussed in detail Immanuel Kant's moral imperative. What are principles of moral imperative? So annihilation of caste is a moral imperative, while caste is not. Caste is not something which you see throughout the world. We will see division of labor throughout the world. But caste division is not about division of labor. Maybe in ideal sense, maybe in Rigvedic period, it does have the element of fluidity. It does have the element of mobility. But the caste as it existed in 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, that is not based on the fluidity between different castes. It is based on birth. It is based on rigid system. So taking out this caste can be related to moral imperative. This caste system being inherently discriminatory, violate ethical principles of treating individuals as end in themselves and not means to an end. Going ahead, it put forward a very important question before us. Whether universal moral principle should override cultural norms that perpetuate inequality and injustice. Which one should be given importance? Whether universal moral principle should be given importance or cultural norms that perpetuate inequality and injustice. This question is so much important even 75 years after independence. Even 85 years after introduction of the book, the question remains critically important. We see in these reflections in the debates related to Shabarimala verdict, where there was a conflict between universal moral principles that is based on equality, that is based on freedom of religion. That means that is being possessed against the cultural norms, that is not to enter, not to let women of particular ages to enter the temple. We have seen certain reflections in the debates associated with the other religious communities, like the covering of heads in the Muslim community. We have seen certain debates related to in educational institutions, what kind of dress code should be done in educational institutions. So the book put forward before us what should be our guiding factor in going forward. Let's see some of the criticism of B.R. Ambedkar. Like every ideologies, whether it is religious ideologies or whether it is Gandhi or whether it is anybody, nobody is above the rational norm of criticism. What are the criticism of B.R. Ambedkar's view? One of the most recent critics of B.R. Ambedkar is the nationalist leaders or nationalist politics. What are the nationalist critics of Ambedkar? They came up with the belief that Ambedkar is a product of Western education. Ambedkar doesn't understand the nitty-gritties of Hindu society, as a whole the Hindu ideology. Now this stands merit if Ambedkar was a scholar. But Ambedkar is much beyond a scholar. He is from Dalit community who went to prominent universities of the world. From a person who has first-hand experience of what caste discrimination feels like. You cannot negotiate, you cannot nullify its impacts as somebody who is a product of Max Muller's readings. Similarly, the oversimplification of caste system. So this is again so much being debated by intellectuals. Caste system, whether you can use Ambedkar annihilation of speech in literary debates. This is not a literary argument or there is no collection of research work. This is simply a speech and it has to be considered as a speech. Excessive focus on Hindu religion. One of the credible arguments against whatever the logics Ambedkar have put forward. It is not simply, caste is not simply within the limits of Hindu religion. The religions equally have certain reflections of caste system. Neglect of intersectionality. That means disempowerment of an individual or a society not just happens because of caste. It happens because of so much other limitations. Poverty you cannot completely relate with caste. One of the reflections of this, one of the solutions of this put forward by land reforms that has been implemented after independence. What was the idea of land reforms? Asset or ownership of asset was considered as a tool for social and economic empowerment. Similarly, reservation in jobs. What is the ethical argument for reservation in jobs? It is not simply economic empowerment, but it is in the decision making of the whole country. Every community should have a say. That is why certain limitation, at least reservations for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe communities has been implemented. Now we have expanded the meaning of reservations. Now we even have economics based reservations in EWS. Similarly, lack of recognition of progressive changes. See, through economic empowerment, through political empowerment, to see whatever the arguments we put forward, it provides a picture in 1930s. When you compare it with today's picture, you have a complete different view. Today, even in understanding the views of Ambedkar, even the lower caste or the Ambedkarites have failed to grasp the ideas of Ambedkar. Even those who try to champion Ambedkar, they are not ready to let loose their hold over caste. Caste today is being used as an identity in politics, as an identity in society, as an identity in education, wherever possible. This was not the society, or this was not the ideas Ambedkar put forward. Ambedkar's idea was basis on a casteless society. So one way or the other, whether you are a critic of Ambedkar or whether you are a supporter of Ambedkar, there is high chance both these guys have failed to understand the depth or the dimensions of the ideas put forward by Ambedkar. Similarly, feasibility of solutions. Very easy to say that intercaste marriages are the solution to diffuse the element of caste in the society. Even in 21st century, we see honor killings happening. Even in urban society, we see the opposition to intercaste marriages. We see crimes based on caste. In this context, how much feasible is the cruel optimistic solutions put forward by Ambedkar, like the intercaste marriages? These are questions to ponder upon. On this note, we'll wind up the session. Thank you so much.